Welcome back, you're watching Storyboard. PR company Edelman released its 15th annual Trust and Credibility Survey recently. Now, according to the Trust Barometer findings, trust in the Indian government has shot up from 53% to 82%, and Indians trust digital, especially social media, over traditional media for news and information. Here's Edelman's Robert Holdheim on the implications of these findings.
Rob, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
To begin with it, let's establish why the Edelman Trust Barometer is important.
Okay, well, it started out as, in essence, a study that we did, and this was 15 years ago, to give ourselves a foundation and knowledge for the recommendations we make to clients, so we're not pulling these recommendations, out of thin air. And it developed into something much bigger, and over the years we essentially determined that trust is the currency by which our clients, be they governments, be they businesses, NGOs, it's the currency by which they communicate and deal with their stakeholders. And that's why it's become something important. And I think the real importance of it lies in the fact that, and that's something that comes out in the research every year, that people act on trust. Trust isn't just something that sits out there. People actually act on it, whether it's buying products from companies they trust, investing in companies they trust, speaking publicly, positively or negatively about companies they don't trust or do trust.
You look at India, there are some numbers which are completely out of whack with the rest of the world.
Right.
Notably, trust in government has shot up in India.
It has.
So how would you explain that, or what are the implications of that?
It's actually interesting because that trust in government is a number that has been fixed for several years. No matter what happened in India, it didn't shift. It was between 53% and 57%. And it was a little bit frustrating for us because every year either you'd have a massive scandal and you'd expect the numbers to go down, or something good happened, you'd expect them to go up. It was fixed. So this year's result is all the more interesting. Actually, we were a little bit scared that it would stay fixed this year and that we'd have to explain that. But that makes this result all the more interesting. And the simple fact is the research was taken 6 months into the Modi government, so you can't really argue that it's based on anything that's actually happened yet. It's in essence, in our mind, a referendum of hope. It's essentially, when the government trust score wouldn't shift, we came to the conclusion after several years that the population had essentially lost hope, had essentially had no expectations of the government, and had shifted those expectations onto business. While business is not off the hook, there's still expectations of business. We see this as a referendum of hope. The Modi government coming in and an expectation that they will change things, that they will do things. Now, that's a bit of a double-edged sword, of course. I mean, you only have to look to our recent visitor from the United States to see, I think, the last leader who came in on such a weight of hope and expectations and hasn't necessarily managed to live up to any particular group's expectations. And we wonder if that's a cautionary tale for Mr. Modi. So the score itself, the increase and jump of 30 percentage points, 29, we see essentially as a referendum on hope and an establishment of very high expectations in the Modi government.
Right. So we delve deeper into your study. There are two other sort of highlights. One is impact of country of origin, where India doesn't look so good, and the other is the entire BRICS don't look so good as far as trust is concerned. They're less trusted than the developed countries. What could we do about these two issues?
It's actually very interesting. If you look at the overall trust index, we find that the top 5 and 8 of the top 13 trusters are actually emerging markets, and 9 of the bottom 13 and the bottom 5 are developed markets. And that was a bit of a surprising result. What is it about trust in emerging markets? The question you ask, if you now look at it from an outside perspective, and that is answer to the question, how do you view a company based in country X, India, investing in your country? We find the inverse relationship. As you said, it's the BRICS that are the bottom 5. It's developed markets that are the top 5. There are a number of reasons for this. I think one is internal, sort of inward investment kind of reasons, ease of doing business, a proclivity to change regulation, retroactive regulation, and things like that. But also, there's what people in countries are reading about societal issues in India. There's the fact that there are no real global brands from India. There's the fact that Indian companies and emerging market companies have a tendency to deal more with emerging markets than they do with developed markets. So there are two schools of thought here. One school of thought says this is important and it's a barrier for Indian companies looking to go abroad. And another school of thought says, well, this is simply normal. It's Japan before Sony, it's Korea before Samsung. I find it particularly interesting that we have an increasing number of Indian-born or Indian-origin CEOs in global corporations. You know, you have Microsoft, MasterCard, Deutsche Bank, Pepsi. Why are Indian CEOs trusted to run global corporations but not trusted to take Indian corporations global? That's a question that comes up. So I do believe there are issues around transparency, which also comes in the factors in our study. Transparency. There are issues around engagement that Indian companies have to improve on before they're going to be accepted, especially in developed markets.
Now to get on to another very significant showing, which is trust in media in India, and you break that up, and you're seeing the rise of social media at the cost of traditional media, obviously.
Yeah.
So again, what do you think? How do you think this impacts India?
Well, I think it's, interestingly, traditional media is still more important in India than it is in other markets. And so that is, I think that's an important result, but the simple fact is it's declining rapidly. Search engines have taken up a primary role, and we even in the study looked at very specific instances. Where do you get your first source of information, your first general information, your breaking news information? And in all cases, it was either press or television, so traditional media, but rapidly declining, and search and social media rapidly increasing. I think there's two elements behind this. One is obviously the wealth of information available on the internet. The second is people tend to trust opinions of people like me, people like themselves, as opposed to authority figures like CEOs, increasingly, and the primary source for that information increasingly is online. So you have again, this is a double-edged sword, like so many of these results. You have a potentially positive benefit in the sense that communicators, whether it's a government, whether it's a company, can bypass the media filter and go directly to their stakeholders. And we find that as long as the content is relevant, of high quality and ethical, in other words, you say who you are and so on, that this is an increasingly important method of communicating. And if you look on the results, actually owned media, which are the primary source of sponsored content, if you will, is incredibly high in India, jumped 15 points. The flip side of that double-edged sword is that it can lead to a bit of an echo chamber effect. And a lot of people would argue this is what's going on in the United States, where people essentially limit their intake of information to people who agree with them to begin with. You don't get both sides of any story. You essentially search out material that that corresponds to what you already believe. That leads to hardening of opinions and can lead to then, poor decision making, can lead to increased dissension and debate that isn't very productive, like you have going on, some would argue, in the United States at this point.
Sure. Link two things. One is you spoke about the need for transparency.
Yeah.
And then you're talking about this echo chamber kind of conversations. Do you think more CXOs should be writing, blogging, tweeting? We have seen a few Indian CEOs who are doing that to great benefit to themselves. Yeah. And they all trusted brands, all those CEOs, trusted sources of information.
Absolutely, I think they should be. And again, the issue is what are they tweeting and what are they writing? Again, the content, as I said, has to pass all of those three tests. But absolutely, I mean, look, you have two possible situations, and you talk about earned trust, and you talk about manufactured trust. Somebody mentioned this to me the other day, and I had to delve into what that actually was. We used to actually call that putting lipstick on a pig, where you try to make something that isn't look better. That actually doesn't work anymore, and I would argue anybody who tries to do that is pretty much in for trouble. But in terms of earning trust, you can be doing everything great. If you don't tell anybody about it, you don't earn any trust, right? So I believe it's very important for companies. We had this concept over the last few years, and of course central to our business, that every company needs to be a media company. Right? You can't just rely on external filters to push the information. You have to. That was fine when you had essentially financial information coming down the chain from a CEO through media to shareholders. But in this multi-stakeholder environment, you have to contact directly. You have to make sure that your information is getting out. And there are very clear channels to do this, and there are ways to do it in a very positive way. Anybody who isn't using digital channels these days, again, because if you want to address what we call in our survey people like me and average employees, which are both higher than CEO in many countries, slightly below CEO in India, where the CEO is still trusted, but are very important target audiences. If you want to communicate with these target audiences, the way to do it is through digital channels. And that's why digital is so important.
In the age of social media, companies need to increasingly communicate directly with consumers to build brand trust. We're going to take a short break here. When we come back, Ogilvy's new CEO, Kunal Jaswani, on the agency's new digital focus.